Hi, everyone. So this month, as the high holy days approach us, uh, we're sitting here with Enzi Tanner and Nadav David from Community Safety Campaign. How are you all doing today?
Pretty good. How you doing today?
Doing good. Excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm doing great. Excited to hear about your work. So, to let everyone know, Community Safety Campaign is an initiative by Jewish community organizers, political educators, strategists, and healers who are called to contest for narrative and material power to one, shift practices of Jewish safety in the US, two, organize Jews and Jewish community into abolitionist resistance of the police state, and three, build deeper community collaboration and solidarity with our non-Jewish siblings. So that all gives us, it's a mission statement that gives us a lot to talk about. Can you talk me through what each of these three steps mean, Enzi?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. That's a good question. So first, we want to build Jewish communities and organizational skills and confidence with community safety. This can mean and look like a lot of different things, from training community members and partners in de-escalation to creating supports for mental and physical emergencies, for mental and physical health emergencies, and to systems of addressing harm without involving policing. And secondly, we believe that in order for our community safety work to be as powerful and holistic as it needs to be, our organizations and communities need to also engage in campaigns to shift away from policing and surveillance and towards community solutions. This looks like local campaigns related to police budgets. This can look like campaigns to end surveillance programs and much, much more. And finally, our community safety work must be done in deep, deep relationship with non-Jewish partners, communities, and our neighbors.
Awesome. I really love hearing about all of that. So in you all's proposals and a lot of the materials you send to JLF, you use the term police state, which I know we talked about, and prison industrial complex a lot. In case someone doesn't know what those terms mean or is unfamiliar with those, can you tell us a little bit more about them, such that we can understand a little bit more about the context in which you're organizing and why this matters for the Jewish community and more broadly?
Yeah,
Nadav?
absolutely. Yeah, so I wanted to start with just a definition. So critical resistance, which is one of the leading organizations in this broader movement, describes the prison industrial complex as the overlapping interests of government and industries that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. So when we talk about the prison industrial complex, we're not talking about just one thing. We're talking about a whole ecosystem and many systems that are overlapping, that create the conditions that we live in. So think about your local police department, the jail or prisons in your city or state, the federally funded programs that are likely surveilling young people in our neighborhoods. Think about the ways that police make their ways into schools and faith institutions. Think about the ways that punishment has a stronghold on our collective consciousness and how we address challenges in our relationships or in our communities and our wider society. All of that is part of what we describe as the prison industrial complex. And what we're building towards, which we frame as abolitionist, are worlds beyond relying on punishment and criminalization to solve our problems and to transform society. So we're both dreaming about new worlds, but we're actualizing them, more importantly. And that's what's really important for Jewish communities as well, is we have these values, I think, in a lot of our Jewish communities of changing the world, of transforming our communities. And sometimes we are encouraged to rely on industries and rely on parts of our government systems that are not actually serving us. And a clear example of that is the ways in which police and federal law enforcement agencies are often called as the only solution to addressing anti-Semitic violence. And we are really clear in the work that we do that we must imagine different realities. and we must bring them to life. So we've spent a lot of the last many years in various organizations helping communities get clear about why the current system, why the current way that we're looking and seeking safety is not working, why it causes harm to people in our communities and people in wider neighborhoods that we live in, why it is not actually there to serve us. It's there to serve the interests of state violence, and ultimately why other options are available and how we make those available and resource those options. So that's part of how we're addressing this work.
So one thing I really love about that answer, like earlier on there, right? Like a lot of the time we start talking about like overlapping systems that can get really abstract, but you're really talking in a way, like you really did a great job of framing it in a way where you can understand even how interpersonal relationships and the way we think about resolving conflict are reflective uh, of this. And I think like another place that we see a lot of abstraction that I think we'd like to move towards a little bit more, concrete action is in calls of solidarity, right? Like as a result of this kind of violence, we have a lot of, what you would call calls for solidarity, but there isn't really real infrastructure to materially support this or to shift things or to challenge power in the Jewish institutions that rely so heavily on police for security. Enzi, can you tell me a little bit more about what building this infrastructure looks like?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So infrastructure trust means resources of many kinds to support individual communities and our society more widely to transition from the prison industrial complex to worlds beyond it. This can be funding for purposes of building new models or resourcing existing models. This can be training and skills development opportunities. And this can be stronger relationships among organizations and so much more. And so it could look like a lot of different things. And these are some types of ways in which we think it can look like.
So in beginning this work, as you start moving towards making these more concrete things happen, you started with a research phase, important piece of groundwork for any project, right? Could you tell me a little bit more about what this process looked like and what were some of the key insights that came from it?
Yeah, we are in the midst of the research now. Over the last year, we've been building out our team, which is a really amazing team of nine people. And part of why we prioritized the research phase was because we knew that we needed to make a major intervention that was at a much larger scale than any of us had worked at before. Many of us had organized in local context and even in some national organizations, but we realized that we actually needed to develop something that would cut across our organizations and would be much bigger and have a much deeper impact in our movements and ultimately in our Jewish communities and beyond. So for that reason, we set out to interview key organizations that we believe are most effectively fighting the prison industrial complex, but also creating the practices of community safety that we really need. And many of these organizations have been doing this work for decades, and they each take a bit of a different approach and focus on a different area. But what they are providing us is the insight into what's needed. So what's been working in their work or in the ecosystem at large, but also where there are major gaps. So we've already interviewed about a dozen organizations over the last year, and we'd like to interview another 20 or so organizations that are local, that are national, that are Jewish and non-Jewish, to really gain a better understanding of their approaches, the successes and challenges they had, and ultimately what gaps they see that we could fill in the project that we're developing. So one of the really key insights that we've taken from these research conversations is the need for more coordination amongst our movement. A lot of organizations are kind of choosing one lane or the other, one lane being kind of resisting the ways things currently are. So building campaigns, building projects, building organizations that are really focused on ending the prison industrial complex. We then see other organizations who are really focused on building building the alternative structures or reviving practices that people have been using for generations. And what we're getting clear about is that we need a strategy, we need an organization or a movement that is going to connect those two things and coordinate those two things. So the building part, the building the new, doesn't happen without resisting the old or the bad. So we want to really think about how do we build a vision for what we're doing that connects the two and that provides a way to stop the bad and to build up the new and the good.
I love that. And I want to talk more about that vision for community safety, right? Like as you're talking about, right, you're connecting not just with Jewish communities, but with Muslim communities and Black Christian communities who already do community safety work. What do their programs look like? The ones that have sort of inspired your campaign, and I guess like a follow-up would be sort of what is unique about what safety beyond policing for the Jewish community might look like? If I can ask you to answer such a big question.
You want me to start, Nadav, and then you hop in, especially with the examples and stuff? All right, perfect. Thank you, Jordan, for asking that question. So starting off that recognizing the real risks we face and that our neighbors and partners face and relying on each other to address those risks. State violence has been given throughout history of the empire that we live in. And I know for myself, I'm often asking the question, how do we as victims of statehood violence rely on the state and what does that look like? So communities have found ways to protect and defend themselves for generations. And here are some examples that Nadav will lift up.
Yeah, thanks, Enzi. I think we're still learning a lot of these examples, but an example I learned about recently that I thought was really compelling was a group of farm workers out in Northern California were fighting for better working conditions. And in that fight, they started to realize that there was a lot of opposition, both from the company that employed them, but also from local residents to them fighting for their needs and for the resources that they deserve. And what they did was they organized within their community and also beyond with supporters, community safety teams. So teams of people who would show up to be present for them as they were working day to day to be sure that they were protected from harassment and from violence on the part of people who were resistant to their demands, but also that when they were organizing for better working conditions, when they were facing their bosses, when they were being clear about the need for things to change, that they would have people at their side who could protect and defend them. So I think that's just a really beautiful example of the ways that communities and neighborhoods are relying on each other and recognizing that the risks are real and legitimate and scary, but that solidarity is needed in order to protect and defend ourselves and our communities and our rights. I think there's also examples of cross-community defense. Like historically, I think there are movements in the US where Black folks and Puerto Ricans protected each other, and a lot of revolutionary movements where people recognize that our communities are at risk of violence from similar forces, even if that violence looks different or impacts us differently, but that ultimately showing up for each other, whether it's providing like safety and security, or it's providing care work that's needed to sustain people in their day-to-day with meals and with childcare and other things, or whether it's stepping in to address harm when it happens. Like there are histories of solidarity between and amongst communities that I think are really compelling for us to look at and learn from.
And as for what that sort of means for the Jewish community and like what it might look like for us.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think in the mainstream Jewish communities, there's sometimes a push to really look inwards and to protect ourselves by isolating or by bringing in like professionalized, militarized law enforcement. Like those are often what we see in our work as the directions that many Jewish institutions are taking when anti-Semitic threats or anti-Semitic violence happens. And what we're calling for is that actually our communities will be most well protected and well just in general when they are actually in relationship with their neighbors and with other communities. And anti-Semitism plays a critical role in upholding white supremacy and white nationalist violence in the US and globally. And in order for us, we believe that in order for us to, for our communities to be well and protected, we need to actually remain in relationship and deepen relationship with the people who are around us in the communities who have our backs. So Jews are living with real risks, and that risk like shows up differently for each of us, depending on race and class and gender and lots of other determinants. But what we know clearly is that our continued reliance on law enforcement will not protect us. And there are many reasons why that's true. There are political reasons, but also there are material reasons, like the fact that many white supremacist organizations are actively recruiting from law enforcement agencies. And we see that many law enforcement agencies and members are already members of these far-right groups. So that's only one reason. There are many other reasons, but I want to be very clear that our hypothesis of like what needs to shift is very much rooted in the reality of the risks that all of us are living with in a pretty militarized society with strong authoritarian forces. So things are real and scary, but also one of the dynamics that we're really trying to tend to is for communities to realistically assess what are the threats. Because when we talk about community safety with many of our Jewish communities, they often go to the most extreme circumstances. And we actually believe that in order for us to be more prepared for those extreme circumstances, we need a lot of practice and a lot of muscle with the things that are much more common in our communities, whether it be interpersonal violence, whether it be mental health emergencies, whether it be verbal escalation. There are lots of other things that we know we need to build and work on that don't require us going to the most extreme circumstances.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, you guys, for sharing about your work and for your time. Appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you, Jordan. And thank you, JLF.
Thank you, Jordan, JL, for having us on.
Appreciate you.